I knew moving into a neighborhood with a homeowners association would be a gamble, but I figured if I kept to myself, paid my dues, and minded my business, they'd leave me alone. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. It all started about 6 months after I moved in. My name's Scott Anderson, by the way. 42, contractor, and proud owner of a well-earned bald spot. I spent a good chunk of my weekends installing a brand new sprinkler system across my front lawn. It wasn't cheap either, top of the line, water efficient, and smart timed. My front yard finally looked like something out of a landscaping magazine. Enter Trisha Thompson. She was the president of our HOA, a tightly wound middle-aged woman with the kind of haircut that just screamed trouble. She had a clipboard practically glued to her hand and a permanent scowl on her face. One afternoon, while I was adjusting one of the sprinkler heads, Trisha marched up my driveway like she owned it. "You know, Scott," she said, voice dripping with fake sweetness, "your sprinklers are an eyesore. They need to be uniform with the rest of the neighborhood." I glanced at the other homes. Every single one had outdated, rusted sprinkler heads popping out of patchy grass. Uniform? These are brand new, efficient, and installed to code, I said, wiping dirt off my hands. Trisha's lips tightened. The HOA guidelines clearly state that any modifications to the front yard must be approved by the board. "I submitted the form last month," I said, pulling the email printout from my truck's glove compartment. "You signed off on it." Her cheeks flushed pink. She clearly hadn't expected that. She muttered something about re-evaluating and stomped off, heels clicking angrily. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I woke up to find my sprinkler system sputtering like it was dying. Water was gushing out of cracked heads, and some of the pipes had been deliberately twisted out of place. It was sabotage. I just didn't have proof. Yet, I spent the whole morning inspecting the damage, and my gut told me Trisha had something to do with it. But gut feelings weren't enough. I needed evidence if I was going to take her down, so I got to work. I wasn't about to let someone vandalize my property and walk away clean. After seeing the damage, I installed a set of high-definition security cameras around my house that very afternoon. They were discreet but covered every inch of the front yard, every angle of the driveway, and especially the sprinkler system. The first few nights passed without incident. Then, around 2 in the morning on a Thursday, the cameras caught something. Trisha, wearing a dark hoodie and sneakers, crouched by the flower beds, struggling to pry up one of the sprinkler heads with a wrench. She wasn't even subtle about it. She yanked and twisted like a kid trying to steal candy from a vending machine. I downloaded the footage, made multiple backups, and tucked the originals in a fireproof safe. Then I took high-resolution stills, printed them out, and organized everything in a neat binder. My years in construction taught me that when you build a case, you build it solid. The next step was to hit her where it hurt, the law. I called the local police department the next morning and asked to speak directly with the property crimes unit. Officer Ramirez, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp eye for details, took my call. "You're telling me you have video of someone vandalizing your irrigation system?" she asked, tapping her pen against her notebook. "Not just someone," I said, sliding the binder across the table. "That's Trisha Thompson, president of our HOA." Officer Ramirez flipped through the pages, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "We've dealt with her before," she muttered, almost to herself. "Usually minor complaints, nuisance stuff. Nothing like this. This is deliberate property damage," I said. "And considering the cost to repair, it crosses into felony territory." She nodded slowly. "We'll open an investigation. In the meantime, don't confront her. Let us handle it." That was fine by me. I wanted this done by the book. Over the next few days, the police gathered their own evidence. They canvassed the neighborhood quietly, asking if anyone else had experienced strange damage to their property. Turns out, I wasn't alone. 3 other residents had noticed busted outdoor lights, broken garden ornaments, and tampered mailboxes. No one had connected the dots before, but now it was clear Trisha had a pattern. When the police brought her in for questioning, she tried to play innocent, claimed I had invited her to inspect my property and that any damage was accidental. But Officer Ramirez had the footage queued up and ready. The moment Trisha saw herself on screen, wrench in hand, her face went pale. She lawyered up fast, but the damage was done. The district attorney decided to press charges, felony vandalism and criminal mischief. Meanwhile, I wasn't just sitting around. I filed a small claims case against her personally for the cost of repairing my sprinkler system, plus punitive damages for harassment. The court date was set for a month later. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who once tiptoed around Trisha started openly avoiding her. The few die-hard HOA loyalists tried to downplay it, but the sight of a police cruiser parked outside her house for hours shattered any illusion of her being above reproach. When the day of the hearing arrived, I wore my best jeans and a clean button-down shirt. No need to dress fancy, just look honest and prepared. Trisha came in with a high-priced attorney who looked like he charged by the minute. The judge, a gray-haired man with heavy glasses, flipped through our case files with a bored expression until he hit the photos and video stills. Then he sat up straighter. "Mr. Anderson," the judge said, adjusting his glasses. "You have documented evidence showing the defendant tampering with your irrigation system?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, handing over a flash drive with the video footage, along with printed stills. The judge plugged it into the courtroom monitor. The room went silent as Trisha's late-night antics played out in full color. The scraping of the wrench, the snapping of plastic, the gleeful little jig she did when she thought she'd gotten away with it was all there. When the video ended, the judge turned to Trisha's lawyer. "Does the defense wish to contest the authenticity of this footage?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "No, Your Honor." "Then there's little left to discuss." He flipped to the last page of my binder. "Mr. Anderson is requesting reimbursement for damages totaling $3,400, plus an additional claim for emotional distress and punitive damages." The judge set down the binder and looked at Trisha with a gaze sharp enough to cut steel. "Ms. Thompson, not only did you vandalize private property, but you abused your position of authority within the Homeowners Association to intimidate and harass a resident. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff." He banged the gavel once, loudly. "In addition to reimbursing Mr. Anderson for the full cost of repairs, you are fined $10,000 in punitive damages. Furthermore, I am recommending the DA pursue restitution for the other residents you targeted." Trisha sank into her chair, visibly trembling. The judge wasn't done. "Given the egregious nature of your actions, I am forwarding this case to the county civil court for review of your position within the HOA. It is my recommendation that you be barred from holding any leadership role in any association within this jurisdiction for no less than 5 years." I didn't have to look around to know that the small group of spectators, mostly neighbors, were grinning ear to ear. Outside the courthouse, a few of them clapped me on the back. "About time someone took her down," said Mr. Patel, who lived 2 houses down from me. "We should throw a block party to celebrate," joked Mrs. Kim from across the street. I laughed. "Maybe after I get my front yard back in shape." I spent the next few weeks repairing the sprinkler system properly. This time, without fear of someone sneaking around at night with a wrench. As for Trisha, she resigned from the HOA within days of the court ruling. No notice, no farewell letter, just a terse email sent to the board, which leaked almost immediately. The email blamed personal attacks and a toxic environment for her departure. No one bought it. The HOA board scrambled to fill her seat. They ended up appointing a retired firefighter named Paul, a straightforward guy who promised to run things transparently and fairly. First order of business? Instituting a new rule. Any HOA board member caught abusing their authority would face immediate removal and referral to law enforcement. The neighborhood felt lighter, like a dark cloud had finally blown away. People started chatting more at the mailbox, waving from their driveways, even organizing community cleanups. It wasn't perfect, no neighborhood ever is, but it was ours. And now, it was worth fighting for. The weeks after Trisha's downfall felt like breathing fresh air after a storm. The neighborhood buzzed with a kind of cautious optimism, like we were all waking up from a bad dream we hadn't realized we were living. Still, something gnawed at me. As satisfying as it was to see her stripped of her position and fined into oblivion, there was a nagging sense that we hadn't seen the full extent of her mess yet. I kept thinking about those quiet conversations Officer Ramirez had with my neighbors, the ones who spoke up about broken lights and twisted up mailboxes. It felt too coordinated, too deliberate for just one person acting alone. One evening, as I was tightening a few bolts on my repaired sprinkler system, Paul, the new HOA president, walked up carrying a thick manila folder. "Scott," he said, setting the folder down on the tailgate of my truck, "I think you should see this." Inside were copies of HOA financial reports, years worth of them. Paul explained that after Trisha resigned, the remaining board members voted to audit the HOA's accounts, just to be safe. What they found was a financial disaster. Missing dues, unauthorized expenses, and shell companies billing the HOA for services that had never actually been performed. The worst part? Half of the companies had mailing addresses that traced back to a P.O. box rented in Trisha's name. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just petty vandalism or rule-breaking. This was full-scale embezzlement. Paul rubbed the back of his neck, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars, Scott. Maybe more once the full audit's done. Have you called the cops? I asked. He nodded grimly. Already filed a report. Detective McMillan's leading the investigation now. I didn't know McMillan personally, but his reputation around town was solid, thorough, relentless, and allergic to bureaucracy slowing him down. The next morning, I was summoned to a special meeting at the community center. Not just me, the entire neighborhood was invited. The place was packed. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as people squeezed in, murmuring anxiously. Paul stood at the front, along with Detective McMillan, who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a crime novel. Rumpled gray suit, sharp eyes that missed nothing. We're going to be transparent with you, Paul began. The audit uncovered serious financial misconduct. Funds were misappropriated, and services you paid for were never rendered. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Detective McMillan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Evidence points to a coordinated scheme orchestrated by your former HOA president. We believe she created fake companies to siphon HOA money into personal accounts. This goes beyond civil matters. We're pursuing criminal charges. An elderly man in the back raised his hand. What kind of charges? Grand theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud, McMillan said without hesitation. Given the amount stolen, she could be facing significant prison time. No one cheered. This wasn't like the courthouse drama with the vandalism. This was heavier, uglier. People looked stunned, betrayed. After the meeting, McMillan pulled me aside. You were the first to bring her actions to light, he said. Your case gave us the opening to dig deeper. Glad I could help, I said, though the weight of what he was saying settled heavily on my shoulders. In the following weeks, the investigation widened. Subpoenas were issued. Bank records revealed that Trisha had been funneling HOA money into luxury vacations, designer clothes, and even a down payment on a lake house 2 counties over. McMillan built a rock-solid case. When they arrested her formally this time, it wasn't a discreet affair. They showed up at her door early on a Saturday morning, lights flashing, neighbors watching from behind curtains. She was led away in handcuffs, her face pale and drawn. An emergency election was held to fill the rest of the vacant board seats. This time, the candidates were people who had lived in the neighborhood for years, people who genuinely cared. Teachers, retired military, small business owners. Folks you could trust. At the first official meeting under the new board, Paul laid out a plan to rebuild. We're cutting unnecessary expenses, he said. Redirecting funds to fix what's been neglected. And we're implementing mandatory third-party audits every year. There was a standing ovation. Still, cleaning up the mess wasn't easy. The missing funds meant delaying some much-needed repairs around the neighborhood. But when volunteers organized weekend work parties planting flowers, repainting fences, fixing broken benches, people showed up in droves. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about taking back what was ours. One afternoon, while painting the entrance sign, Mrs. Kim paused to look around at the busy scene. Kids chasing each other across the grass, neighbors laughing and swapping stories, someone firing up a portable grill. Feels like a real community again, she said. It does, I agreed, dipping my brush into a fresh can of paint. Meanwhile, Trisha's legal troubles mounted. Her court-appointed attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't in a forgiving mood. With the evidence stacked sky-high, a trial date was set. I was subpoenaed to testify, along with several other neighbors. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed again, but this time the mood was different, somber, determined. When I took the stand, the prosecutor guided me through the events calmly. I described the vandalism, the retaliation, the discovery of the financial fraud. My voice was steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Trisha sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I remembered, shrunken inside an ill-fitting suit, her shoulders hunched. The prosecution presented bank records, fake invoices, and testimony from forensic accountants. They showed how she'd built an elaborate web of lies, all while pretending to enforce trivial rules about paint colors and lawn heights. The defense tried to paint her as overwhelmed, stressed, a woman who made poor decisions under pressure. But when the jury returned after only 2 hours of deliberation, the verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. The judge, a woman with a reputation for no-nonsense sentencing, didn't mince words. You abused your authority for personal gain, betrayed the trust of your community, and inflicted lasting harm, she said. You will serve 12 years in state prison. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Afterward, in the parking lot, Paul clapped a hand on my shoulder. You started this, Scott, he said. If you hadn't stood up, who knows how much longer she would have gotten away with it. I just wanted to fix my sprinklers, I said, half joking. He laughed, a real, hearty laugh that echoed across the lot. Sometimes it starts small, he said, but it changes everything. Life returned to a new normal after that. The HO, now rebranded as the Neighborhood Council, operated with full transparency. Budgets were posted online. Meetings were open forums. Disputes were handled with common sense and decency. Every time I walked out to adjust my sprinklers, I couldn't help but smile, not because the grass was greener, but because I knew the roots underneath were stronger than ever. The spring after Trisha's conviction came early that year, painting the neighborhood in soft greens and bright yellows. It wasn't just the weather that felt lighter, it was the collective sense that the worst was behind us. But as new flowers bloomed and fresh paint dried, something unexpected surfaced that none of us could ignore. Paul showed up at my door one afternoon with a laptop tucked under his arm and a look that told me this wasn't a social visit. Scott, got a minute? He asked, glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to be listening. I stepped aside, letting him into the kitchen where sunlight poured across the counter. He opened the laptop and pulled up a series of documents: scanned leases, payment records, and emails. The folder was labeled Community Easements. You ever wonder why she was so obsessed with controlling people's front yards? Paul asked, tapping the screen. Figured it was just power, I said, pulling a chair out. Partly, he said. But it turns out, Trisha had been negotiating private easements with a commercial landscaping company. She was trying to sell rights to sections of our front yards without telling anyone. I leaned in, my stomach tightening. Sell them? For what? Advertising space, Paul said. Billboards, branded landscaping, the works. She figured if she could establish easement rights without resistance, she could rake in monthly payments from businesses. The HOA wouldn't see a dime. It would all go to a shell company in her name. The documents laid it out in brutal clarity. Contracts already signed, even though no one in the neighborhood had agreed to anything. It was all pending final county approval, which, thankfully, was delayed because of the criminal investigation already underway. So she wasn't just stealing money, I said, the words heavy in my mouth. She was trying to turn our neighborhood into her personal cash cow. Paul nodded grimly. We need the county to nullify those contracts before it's too late. We spent the next 2 days gathering signatures from every homeowner. No one hesitated after hearing what Trisha had been planning. Some were furious they hadn't been asked, others disgusted by how deep her manipulation had gone. By the end of the weekend, we had a thick stack of affidavits ready to present to the county commission. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. It wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been. Rows of wooden benches filled the chamber, and a panel of commissioners sat at the front, their nameplates gleaming under fluorescent lights. Paul opened the presentation, walking the commissioners through the evidence in calm, deliberate tones. I followed, explaining how none of us had ever consented to the easements. Mrs. Kim and Mr. Patel each gave statements about how the contracts would have devalued our properties and destroyed the character of our community. The commissioners listened carefully, flipping through the documentation we provided. When the chairwoman finally spoke, her voice was firm. This commission finds the easement contracts presented to be fraudulent, obtained under false pretenses, and in violation of county property statutes. All agreements are hereby voided. Relief swept through the room like a breeze. As we stood to leave, the chairwoman added, additionally, we are forwarding this matter to the district attorney's office for further criminal review. By the time we stepped into the parking lot, it was clear Trisha's troubles were far from over. Back home, things settled into a new rhythm. The neighborhood council published monthly newsletters, detailing finances down to the last penny. Kids rode their bikes through the streets without nervous parents glancing over their shoulders. Even the smallest things felt different, a neighbor waving with genuine friendliness instead of wary obligation, Spontaneous cookouts sprouting up on weekends, people walking dogs and stopping to chat instead of hurrying past. One evening, as I was replacing an old patio light, Paul dropped by again, this time with 2 beers in hand. "You hear about the grand jury?" he asked, handing me a bottle. I leaned against the railing, popping the cap off. "No. What happened?" "Indicted her again. This time for real estate fraud, wire fraud, and attempted unlawful transfer of property rights. She's looking at another 12 to 15 years stacked onto her sentence." I let out a low whistle. "She's going to be a very old woman by the time she sees the outside again." "She earned every day of it," Paul said, lifting his bottle. We clinked them together, the sound sharp and satisfying in the warm evening air. Summer came, and with it, the first community barbecue in years. Long folding tables groaned under the weight of food people actually seemed excited to share. Someone set up a bouncy castle for the kids. A local band played on a makeshift stage pieced together from old pallets and tarps. Near the grill, Mrs. Kim waved me over. "You know," she said, flipping burgers expertly, "I think we owe you more than just a thank you." "I didn't do it alone," I said, genuinely meaning it. "But you started it when no one else would," she said. "Before you. We were all just hoping she'd get bored and move on." "Mr. Patel chimed in from the next table, slicing watermelon. "You reminded us we don't have to accept being bullied." I nodded, feeling a rare kind of pride settle in my chest, not the loud, boastful kind, but the quiet, enduring kind. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the first stars blinked awake, Paul called everyone's attention to the center of the field. He held up a simple wooden plaque, handmade, nothing fancy. It read, "In recognition of those who stood up when it mattered." He handed it to me without fanfare, and the crowd erupted in cheers. I didn't know what to say, so I just held it up and smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing you fought for something worth protecting. As the night wore on, laughter floated through the air, mingling with the smell of grilled corn and fresh-cut grass. Music played, children ran barefoot across the cool earth, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt whole. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and ours, and built on something stronger than fear or petty rules. Built on the knowledge that when you stand together even against the worst kind of corruption, you can rebuild something better than what was lost. And sometimes, it all starts with a broken sprinkler.